Have you ever wondered if the house you live in might be attracting presences that shouldn't be there? It might seem like a strange, almost superstitious idea, but according to Edgar Cayce, considered by many to be the greatest psychic of the 20th century, the way a home is built, the energy of the people who lived there, and even seemingly insignificant details can turn it into a true meeting point for lost souls. Yes, those presences that wander aimlessly, trapped between worlds, often seeking warmth, memories, or simply a place to rest. Now, what almost no one realizes is that this attraction isn't random. There are patterns, and Cayce in his readings left clear clues about which houses tend to be spiritual magnets and which protect their residents. Imagine looking at your living room, your kitchen, or your bedroom and thinking, is what I'm feeling here just my imagination? How many times have you entered a room and felt an inexplicable heaviness, as if something was hanging in the air? Or perhaps you've noticed that certain houses seem luminous, welcoming, even without sophisticated decor, while others transmit an unexplainable chill. This isn't just aesthetics, nor is it coincidence. For Cayce, these sensations were the reflection of invisible layers, vibrational records left by those who lived there before, by the intense emotions experienced within those walls, and often by the very way the house was built. This is where the story becomes unsettling. Some houses, he said, function almost like lighthouses in the dark, lighthouses that attract spiritual travelers who have not yet found rest. But what makes a home like this? We're not talking about horror movies or haunted mansions with broken windows and dusty corridors. Often, these are ordinary, seemingly normal houses that carry subtle characteristics, almost imperceptible to those who aren't paying attention. Cayce said that lost souls, those who passed away abruptly or who are still strongly attached to earthly memories, are attracted to environments that reflect their own confusion. Disorganized environments where carelessness reigns, or spaces marked by constant arguments and disharmony. These houses, even beautiful on the outside, become fragile within, like open doors to the invisible. Have you ever paused to consider if the energy of your home tells a story that isn't just yours? There's something curious that few people know. For Cayce, the home is a direct extension of its residents' souls. This means that, in a way, your house speaks for you. It transmits to the spiritual world the emotions you cultivate, the habits you repeat, and even the thoughts you insist on nurturing. When this frequency is positive, full of life, the home acts as a natural barrier, protecting its inhabitants from external influences. But when the energy drops, when the environment fills with resentment, fear, or abandonment, the house emits a signal. And it is precisely this signal that can attract the attention of lost souls who approach in search of affinity. As if they were saying, here is an echo of what I feel. Here, perhaps, I belong. Of course, this perspective can cause unease because, after all, no one likes to think that their home, the place where they rest and seek security, could be vulnerable to invisible presences. But the good news is that Cayce didn't leave these revelations without a solution. He always reminded us that, just as a house can be an invitation to imbalance, it can also become a true temple of protection and peace. The secret lies in the details, in order, in harmony, in the natural light that enters through the windows, in the music that resonates, in the silent prayers made in every corner. Every gesture of care and gratitude strengthens the invisible walls of a home. What to many seems like just a daily habit, opening the curtains, cleaning with care, cultivating plants, smiling with family, for Cayce was, in fact, a form of spiritual shielding. This leads us to an important question. When you look at your own home, what does it reflect? A fortress of peace or an opening to forces you would prefer to keep distant? Now think with me about something even deeper. Cayce believed that many houses were chosen not by chance, but by a kind of karmic attraction. He said that sometimes the incarnated spirit is led to live precisely in places where there are ancient energies, records that need to be resolved. It's as if the home transforms into a stage for learning, forcing the person to deal with shadows they previously ignored. Have you ever heard of someone who moved to a new house and suddenly began to face unexpected challenges, family conflicts, illnesses, a feeling of oppression? For Cayce, it wasn't just coincidence. Often the home is part of the evolutionary process, an important piece in life's puzzle. And if that's true, it means that the lost souls that linger around certain environments may not be there just by chance, but perhaps as part of a larger plot that also involves the living. This opens up space for a reflection few dare to make. To what extent does the house choose its residents as much as the residents choose the house? If you feel that your life after some time in a place has taken a different turn, it might be that this invisible influence played a larger role than you imagine. Cayce spoke of houses where tragedies repeated themselves, almost as if the land or the walls held memories difficult to erase. But he also spoke of homes where entire generations flourished, because there the accumulated energy was one of love, hope, and faith. And most intriguing, for him, both types of places could attract souls, but of very distinct natures. The lost ones sought chaos and sadness. The elevated souls, however, approached homes of peace, almost like invisible guardians. This is where a crucial point comes in, which we need to explore throughout this journey. Cayce's warning was not an invitation to fear, but to awareness. Recognizing that your home can be a mirror of the soul is the first step to transforming it into a sacred space. This means that it doesn't matter if the place you live has a heavy history or if it sometimes feels burdened. There is always a way to redirect the energy, always a way to close the door to what should not enter. And similarly, there is always a way to open the windows, physical and spiritual, so that light circulates and protection is strengthened. Perhaps this is the greatest lesson. The home is not just walls and a roof, but a living reflection of who you are and what you transmit. So if some houses attract lost souls, others inevitably attract blessings. But what are the most common characteristics of a house that attracts lost souls? What did Edgar Cayce truly describe, in detail, about this type of environment? This is what we will delve into from now on, because believe me, some signs are simpler to perceive than you imagine, and perhaps you've already encountered them without realizing. When we talk about the type of house that attracts lost souls, it's natural to imagine something frightening. Dark walls, creaks in the middle of the night, ghost stories told in whispers. But the truth is much more subtle, and, precisely because of that, more unsettling. Edgar Cayce in his readings didn't just describe old mansions or abandoned places. He spoke of any home, modern or old, small or large, that carried certain marks. And, most impressively, many of these marks are not visible to the eyes but felt. Still, there are very concrete clues to identify them. The first characteristic, according to Cayce, is the energy imbued with human suffering. Houses that were the scene of tragedies, violent separations, prolonged illnesses, or sudden deaths carry a record that doesn't disappear easily. Think of a sponge that absorbs water. No matter how much you try to dry it, it retains moisture for a long time. It's the same with the walls and floor of a house. They retain emotional impressions. Lost souls who are precisely trapped in these memories of pain are attracted to this echo, as if the place offers them a reflection of their own condition. Therefore, it's not uncommon to hear stories of houses where residents change, but patterns of sadness seem to repeat. The second characteristic lies in abandonment and disorder. Cayce affirmed that neglected environments, full of broken objects, accumulated dust, and dark spaces, create a vibration of stagnation. And for those who are lost between worlds, unable to move forward, this type of energy becomes a refuge. It's as if the soul says, "Here no one notices me, here I can remain." Interestingly, this doesn't depend on the house's value or its beauty. A luxurious mansion, if disorganized and laden with emotional neglect, can be as vulnerable as a forgotten cabin. Abandonment isn't just physical, it's also emotional. Houses where joy is lacking, where there is heavy silence, tend to open up like invisible doors to unwanted visitors. The third characteristic involves the architecture and structure of the house. This is a fascinating point because for Cayce, the design of a home is not neutral. He mentioned that spaces without ventilation, with little natural light entry and many dark corners, function as pockets of stagnant energy. And stagnant energy is an invitation to what is also spiritually stagnant. A windowless room, long and shadowy corridors, damp basements or forgotten attics are preferred locations for this type of presence. How many times have you heard someone say they avoid entering a certain corner of the house because they don't feel right there? This discomfort is not casual. For Cayce, these points act as magnets, where the flow of energy is interrupted and lost souls find temporary repose. Another important characteristic, perhaps the most direct of all, is related to the daily emotions of the residents. Here we enter delicate territory because it means that it's not enough to look at the house's past or its physical structure. The present also counts, and very much so. Homes where there are constant arguments, lack of respect, harbored resentments, or an atmosphere of coldness end up reinforcing negative vibrations. Cayce described this simply. What you cultivate inside your house transforms into an invisible language understood by the spiritual world. And this language can say, here is pain, here is anger, here is confusion. It is precisely this message that attracts presences that have not yet found peace. However, there is an aspect that often surprises those who study Cayce's readings. He said that it is not only tragedies or bad emotions that attract lost souls, but also excessive attachment to the past. Houses filled with objects kept without purpose, accumulated memories of painful times, inherited furniture carrying heavy stories. All of this creates an atmosphere of connection with what has passed. And those who are trapped between worlds live precisely this condition. They cannot let go of the past. Thus, the home becomes a perfect mirror for this state, and souls find a familiar space there where they recognize themselves. It is not uncommon for people to say, "This house seems to live in the yesterday." For Cayce, this phrase was not just figurative, but literally true in spiritual terms. There are also the lands marked by ancient events, a detail that many forget. Cayce warned that it wasn't just the house itself, but the soil where it was built that could influence its energy. Battle sites, old cemeteries, areas where there was great collective suffering could retain vibrations for centuries. When a new construction was built on such land without any spiritual care, it naturally inherited part of that burden, and so even a modern house could be the scene of strange phenomena. Think about it. How many of us know the true history of the land where we live? Almost never. But for Cayce, this was crucial information for understanding the forces that surround a home. Now, perhaps the most disturbing point of all, Cayce said that certain houses not only attract lost souls, but can imprison them, as if certain environments functioned as energetic traps. This happened primarily in places with great emotional density, associated with structures where light and air circulation were difficult. In these houses, a soul that was already confused could remain trapped for a long time, without realizing there were paths to move forward. The curious thing is that residents often feel this imprisonment symbolically too. Difficulties in advancing in life, a feeling of always being stuck with the same problem, cycles that never resolve. Cayce saw this as a reflection of an environment that urgently needed to be renewed, purified, re-energized. Have you ever noticed that certain houses seem to drain people's vitality? Residents who arrive energized but, over time, lose enthusiasm, get sick, or enter into conflicts that didn't exist before. This was exactly the kind of sign Cayce said to observe. Because for him, the home is never neutral. It is always an active agent in our journey. And if the home is imbalanced, it not only attracts undesirable presences, but directly influences the lives of those who inhabit it. This perception leads us to an inevitable question. If these houses exist, how can we recognize them in time? And more importantly, how can we transform them? Here a pause is worthwhile because the goal is not to instill fear, but to open eyes. From these descriptions, perhaps you've already remembered a house you were in and felt something different, or even your own home, where there's sometimes a sensation difficult to explain. You don't need to see shadows or hear voices to perceive the influence. Sometimes it's a simple unease that arises when entering a certain room. Other times, it's a heavy silence, as if the air is dense. Cayce said, "Trust your perception. If you feel something isn't right, there's probably an invisible reason behind it. And that's the first step to dealing with it. And it is precisely at this point that the promise of hope emerges. Cayce did not believe in fixed destinies. He didn't say that if your house has these characteristics, you are condemned to live with lost souls. Quite the opposite. For him, recognizing the problem is already half the solution. The other half lies in transforming the space, reorienting the energy, bringing vibrations into the home that repel what should not be there. But before we reveal the methods Cayce indicated for protecting and elevating a home, we need to understand one last piece of this puzzle. Why do some souls choose precisely these houses to approach? What are they truly seeking in these places? Perhaps the most intriguing question of all is this: why do lost souls specifically seek out houses with these characteristics? What are they looking for when they approach homes that carry sadness, disorder, or old memories? Edgar Cayce, in his readings, offered an explanation that goes beyond the supernatural, because it touches on something profoundly human. For him, these souls were not monsters, nor diabolical forces, as some might imagine, but rather confused consciousnesses that had not yet understood their new condition after death. In other words, they were beings in transition, clinging to what was familiar to them. And that's where houses come in. They offer a reflection of what these souls still haven't been able to let go of. Imagine a person who spent their entire life suffering, harboring resentments, or living in environments laden with conflict. When the time of their departure arrives, often that soul doesn't immediately find the clarity or serenity to move on. They remain trapped in the pattern they knew. Houses that carry similar vibrations then become like magnets, not because they are bad in themselves, but because they resonate with that state of confusion. It's like when you enter a room full of sad music. Even without realizing it, you start to feel more introspective, perhaps even melancholic. Lost souls function in the same way. They tune into what they find, and if the energy is heavy, there they find company for their own density. But there was something even deeper in Cayce's vision. Many of these souls sought not only affinity, but also comfort. Think about it. A lost spirit is, in essence, someone who feels displaced, without a place. Houses full of accumulated objects, memories, and stagnant energy give a sense of shelter, of continuity. It's not that the house offers true rest, but it conveys the illusion of home. And those who are in confusion cling to any form of familiarity. That's why Cayce said that residents, even unknowingly, end up participating in this process. Because by cultivating certain energies within their own home, they create the environment that souls interpret as a call. What seems to be just a habit, holding grudges, keeping rooms dark, allowing neglect, may in practice be sending an invisible invitation. This idea opens up space for a reflection few dare to make. Do we, on some level, also attract presences that correspond to what we carry inside? Cayce affirmed that we do. According to him, the invisible is a reflection of the human interior. If you cultivate peace, you attract protection. If you cultivate chaos, you attract company for that chaos. And here is the direct connection to the home. The house is not just the space where you live, but an extension of your mind and your emotions. What you feel infiltrates the walls, the furniture, the air. And what infiltrates there becomes a language understood by the spiritual world. Thus, when a lost soul approaches, it is not only the house that calls it, but also the residents, even unintentionally. It's curious to note how Cayce always insisted on looking at these souls with compassion, not just with fear. He said that most of them had no intention of causing harm, but were simply trapped in their own confusion. This doesn't mean their presence was harmless. After all, the emotional weight they carry can influence the environment and the lives of residents. But it helps to understand that the phenomenon is not one of attack, but of resonance. In other words, souls seek something that seems familiar to them, and find in houses with stagnant energy the reflection of their own imprisonment. And here, a surprising revelation arises. By transforming your house into a space of light, you not only protect yourself, but also contribute to freeing these consciousnesses, helping them to move forward. Think of how many times you've heard accounts of people who changed the atmosphere of a home, and suddenly, strange phenomena ceased. Noises, sensations of presence, unsettling dreams. Everything disappeared when the environment was renewed, illuminated, harmonized. For Cayce, this was no coincidence. It was proof that the home acts as a transmitter. When it emits a high frequency, lost souls no longer feel an affinity and thus naturally move away. But before we get to the practices of transformation, it's essential to understand another reason why these presences approach: the desire to continue living, even if indirectly. Many spirits, Cayce said, become so attached to material life that they seek to remain close to human experiences. Houses full of activity, but also conflict and weakness, become ideal places for this attachment. There they can feel part of something. They can feed on the emotional energy of the living, as if absorbing echoes of what they no longer possess. This process is not conscious for them, but it is real. That's why some families, living in certain homes, report inexplicable fatigue, constant discouragement, or conflicts that arise without clear reason. It's not just the walls that weigh them down, but the invisible influence of consciousnesses that remain trapped in matter. And once again, not because they wish to harm, but because they don't know where to go. This perspective changes everything. Because instead of thinking only about protecting oneself from something from outside, Cayce invites us to realize that transformation begins within. If the house is an extension of the soul, then every gesture of harmony is also a gesture of liberation, both for us and for any presences that may be near. The true key, he said, is to understand that life does not end in physical death, and that everyone, incarnated or discarnate, participates in the same energy field. What we offer to the environment returns to us. If we offer chaos, we attract chaos. If we offer peace, we attract protection. This is the invisible logic that governs the home. But perhaps the most fascinating point is this. Cayce said that some people were led to inhabit houses with presences precisely because they had something to learn from it. It was as if life placed before them a clearer mirror of their own inner conflicts. An anxious person might live in a house where they felt constant agitation. Someone melancholic might encounter a heavy, dark home, not as punishment, but as an opportunity for awakening. In these cases, the house becomes part of the spiritual lesson of life itself, demanding that the resident transform not only the physical space, but also their own inner self. It is a challenging vision, but one that gives meaning to experiences that otherwise would seem merely unjust. And here we come to a turning point. If we understand that lost souls approach because they find affinity with the energies of a home, and if we understand that this affinity can be transformed, the natural question is, how? What did Cayce recommend to change this vibration, to protect the home and at the same time create a space where only elevated presences can approach? This is the revelation we need to explore in the next step. But before we get into the practices, I leave you with a reflection. When you look at your home today, what message does it transmit to the invisible? A message of clarity and light, or a silent call to what is still trapped in the past? If up until now we've discussed the signs, reasons, and even risks of living in a house that attracts lost souls, now we need to return to the essential point: what to do about it. Edgar Cayce never left his followers in despair. He knew that talking about invisible forces could generate fear, but he always reminded them that no environment is beyond transformation. For him, the protection of a house was not found in complex amulets or inaccessible rituals, but in simple practices that anyone can perform daily. The key lay in a principle he repeated tirelessly: like attracts like. If the home transmits light, only light can approach. Cayce's first recommendation was almost obvious yet profound: physical cleanliness as a reflection of spiritual cleanliness. He said that a disorganized house, full of accumulated objects and forgotten corners, was fertile ground for stagnant energies. Therefore, he suggested that care for the space be constant, not just cleaning for aesthetics, but cleaning as an act of renewal. Every broken object repaired, every window opened to let in the sun, every swept corner represented, for Cayce, a message sent to the spiritual world. Here there is life, here there is movement, here there is no space for what is trapped. It is interesting to note how this seemingly simple practice also brings immediate relief to those who live in the space. Who hasn't felt a sense of lightness after organizing a drawer or airing out the house? For Cayce, this feeling was also spiritual. Another recommendation was linked to the power of prayer and music. Cayce believed that words and sounds create vibrations that remain in environments even after they cease. Therefore, he suggested that residents consecrate their home through regular prayers, uplifting readings, and soft music. Religion did not matter, but rather intention. He said that a sincere prayer, repeated in every room, is capable of profoundly altering the atmosphere of a home. And when this practice becomes a habit, the house begins to emit a high frequency, naturally repelling presences that vibrate in confusion. Music had the same effect. Harmonious songs, joyfully sung, created an invisible magnetic field of protection where only compatible energies could remain. Cayce also spoke a lot about natural light. For him, darkness favors stagnation, and stagnation favors the approach of lost souls. Therefore, he recommended open windows, curtains that allowed sunlight to enter, and even the practice of lighting candles at certain times. Not out of superstition, but because light symbolizes clarity, movement, and life. A well-lit house is, in his view, a house where shadows find no rest. The same logic applies to air. Ventilation was seen as essential for energy circulation. Closed and stuffy environments accumulate not only dust, but also heavy vibrations. Opening doors and windows was, for Cayce, more than a physical gesture. It was a way of saying, here there is flow, here nothing remains trapped. But perhaps the most powerful practice he recommended was harmony among residents. Cayce insisted that an impeccably clean, well-lit and airy house would be of no avail if there were constant arguments, a lack of respect, or harbored resentments within it. The emotional environment was, for him, the true spiritual foundation of a home. A family that learns to forgive each other, that cultivates words of encouragement, that seeks to resolve conflicts with serenity, creates an invisible barrier against any discordant presence. He explained that the energy of love is incompatible with the energy of loss and confusion. Where there is love, lost souls find no affinity. Therefore, he said that the greatest protection lies not in the walls, but in the hearts that inhabit the house. Another impressive detail in his readings is the importance of conscious intentions. Cayce recommended that residents, upon entering their home, mentally visualize that they are bringing light inside. Small daily rituals, such as giving thanks before sleeping or upon waking, serve to imbue the space with positive vibrations. He believed that every thought leaves a mark, and that repeating gestures of gratitude and faith is like reinforcing the invisible walls of protection. This is why so many people report that, by changing their inner posture, they notice almost immediate changes in the house's atmosphere. Not because the furniture has changed, but because the invisible frequency of the space has been altered. Of course, Cayce also recognized that some houses, due to their history or the land on which they were built, could carry denser burdens. For these cases, he suggested additional practices, such as reading sacred texts aloud, engaging in moments of meditative silence, and even using natural elements, plants, flowers, running water, to renew energy. He believed that nature is a direct channel of purification. A well-cared-for potted plant, a water fountain, even a cultivated garden in the backyard, had the power to balance vibrations. Not as magical objects, but as living reminders that life is always in motion, and movement is the opposite of the stagnation that traps souls. And here we come to the most beautiful point of all. Cayce said that by transforming the home, we not only protect ourselves but also help the lost souls themselves, because upon encountering a luminous space full of peace and harmony, they find no affinity to remain. And in that distancing, they are naturally led to higher levels, where they can finally rest. In other words, caring for the home is not just an act of self-protection, but also an act of compassion. It's like shining a light in the darkness. Those who wandered aimlessly realize there's a better path to follow. This means that every simple gesture inside your home can, in fact, be a small contribution to the liberation of trapped consciousnesses. Now pause and reflect for a moment. How is the energy in your home today? Does it transmit lightness, hope, human warmth? Or does it carry a weight that's difficult to explain? The invitation Cayce extends to us is simple and profound. Look at your home as a reflection of your soul. If you desire peace, cultivate it within yourself and express it in your space. If you desire protection, plant it in every gesture of care, in every word of love, in every sincere prayer. Transformation always begins in the invisible, but it becomes visible in the fruits that appear. More joy, more health, more unity among those who share the same roof, and as a consequence, more protection against what should not remain. Perhaps you are asking yourself, and if I already feel that my house attracts strange presences, is there still time to change? Cayce's answer would be clear. There is always time. No house is condemned, no family is helpless. The power of transformation is in our hands every day in the small details. Start with a cleaning, then with a prayer, then with a smile, and see how, little by little, the home stops being a magnet for lost souls and becomes a temple of light. A place where you not only live but flourish, and where those who have departed find not imprisonment but inspiration to move forward. And if this video has brought new reflections to you, if it has illuminated something that might have been hidden in your heart or in your home, I ask that you share this light with more people. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and help spread this knowledge that Cayce left as a legacy. Because in the end, the message is clear. Our homes are not just constructions of brick and wood. They are extensions of our soul, mirrors of what we carry within. And when we care for them with love and consciousness, we transform not only our lives, but also the destiny of many other souls, visible and invisible.